In the studio with us today we have Justin Studley. Justin's going to be playing saxophone and clarinet, and Justin's a very good friend of mine, and we've actually played music together for many years, so it's a great joy. So when you're recording an instrument like the saxophone, probably the main thing to consider is that you will rarely do a solo saxophone recording, and the saxophone's generally going to augment an ensemble or something like that, which is what we're doing with our recordings. Can happen in the classical world, but generally you're going to be recording a part that's going to be part of a larger soundscape. And that really should be probably at the forefront of what you're trying to consider when you're listening to the saxophone and how it's playing in the room that you're recording it in, and also your choice of microphones. We're going to start by trying a cardioid polar pattern. The cardioid polar pattern, by its very nature, has a very focused and detailed image, and therefore it's really important to take your time to find where the instrument seems to be communicating at its best. So the bell or the horn of the saxophone is obviously where the majority of the sound source comes from, and for most recordings it is very much where we focus our ideas and our ears. Listen deeply to what works best in the room and the situation in which you find yourself. The frequency range is obviously very important, but in the notion of recording a saxophone, what it really generally is it's very loud. It's a really powerful instrument with a huge dynamic range. These new Sony microphones implement the anti-vibrational technology that Sony came up with probably 3 decades ago, and therefore they're ideal for an instrument like this. Having a microphone that can handle that sound pressure level, that doesn't have any resonance in the microphone chamber, is incredibly important. As we spoke about in the beginning of this video series, it's rare that you're going to do a solo saxophone recording. So let's have a listen firstly to our cardioid recording of the saxophone in an ensemble setting. I think it's a beautiful brassy sound. It's very detailed. There's not a great deal of ambience around the saxophone. This would be great in a really crowded mix situation. It's very focused. It's a fantastic microphone. Okay, so we're going to go in now and change the polar pattern from cardioid to figure of 8. Figure of 8 is probably my preference when recording a saxophone. It allows us to capture with the front-facing part of the microphone, the detail, the clarity, the dynamic of the instrument, and with the rear-facing part of the microphone, pick up a lot more air and ambience and interplay of the instrument in the space that you're recording. It's more of a classic sound, and I think it'll work really well with what Justin's playing right now. We have spoken about this in previous video series, but just a reminder that both the cardioid polar pattern and the figure of 8 polar pattern don't remain neutral under about 150 Hertz, which means they have the proximity effect in them, which you can use to your own advantage, but it just means you need to take it into consideration as you move your microphone around, as you're seeking out that sound, that you're going to accentuate those frequencies the closer you are to the sound source. To my ears, I always prefer to go with the figure of 8 polar pattern when I'm recording saxophone, and I think that C100 really lends itself to picking up some of the ambience of the performance, as well as the directional sound from the front of the microphone. It's very usable, and I think it also lends itself to the stylistic playing that Justin has been giving us. You can hear that there is more space around the instrument, and we haven't lost any detail from, in fact, the performance seems altogether a little bit more whole. I think sometimes when you add a little bit more ambience, you get a bit more presence of the musician in the musical recording, and I think that can be really important. You can download the files at the end of this video and have a listen for yourself. I think that cardioid microphone does capture a beautiful brassy sound of that saxophone, and it would be very usable. Obviously, as I mentioned before, my preference is to use the figure of 8 pattern, so let's go into our DAW and have a listen to the figure of 8 recording in an ensemble setting. Justin?
Yeah, it's really, really good. The warmth is there. You're awesome, great.